we've been seeing so many activists in the video game industry freaking out over the EA Saudi deal. There are outlets like Kotaku and PC Gamer saying this is terrible for developers. Studios like Bioware could go under, and that we might see a shift in content created like guns and football are in, but gay is out. And basically, gamers are just pointing and laughing. I have a few different things to show off, but before I get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, join the community in my live streams, and consider supporting through Patreon or YouTube memberships. Now, I always say it, the best person for the job should get the job. Their gender or sexuality or skin color shouldn't matter, but that is really the number one reason why people get hired in the industry now. Not because they're talented, not because they're good developers, not because they're passionate about this industry, but because they check off boxes on a checklist. And I don't think it's going to be that way anymore. I think we are going to see projects that really only exist to be used as vessels to push propaganda being canceled. I think a lot of these activists are going to get laid off and fired. And really, gamers could care less because these people weren't making great games in the first place, like the Biowares. I used to love Bioware, okay? If you had asked me 15 years ago about my thoughts on Bioware, I'd say I love them, but they've just put out failure after failure, and I wouldn't shed a tear if they went under now. They're a shell of the company that they once were, and we're seeing so many people affiliated with Bioware and other studios that have to do with EA coming out and basically melting down over this news. So I had previously talked about this one in another video that will be linked down below, but former Bioware lead writer, who is Trick Weeks, the guy behind Anthem and Andromeda and Veilguard, reads the runes on the EA Saudi deal and speculates that guns and football are in, gay stuff is out, and the venerable RPG studio may be for the chop. Now, I think that there are some amazing games out there that do have a lot of diversity, like Knights of the Old Republic, for example. That's one of the most diverse games I've ever played, but it is phenomenal. The characters don't just exist to promote a certain sexuality. They have a lot of depth in some cases, right? The character sexualities are just a very small piece of the puzzle of who they are, like Juhani, for example, and it was phenomenal. But if modern day Bioware was to make a Knights of the Old Republic, well, we would just end up with a slop fest. They're basically saying that masculinity is bad, that, oh my gosh, masculinity being brought back to video games is going to be such a terrible thing, and all the gay stuff being out is going to be so sad. I'm not going to shed a tear because you guys have been creating bad content for years and years and years. Maybe if these people were actually good at their job, maybe if they were making games that people actually asked for, we could feel a little bit bad for them, but that definitely isn't going to be the case now, that's for sure. And we also have Kotaku coming out and saying EA Saudi deal fallout, junk credit ratings, risky AI bets, and developer fears. Now, I think that this deal could go two different ways. One could be they make phenomenal games, right? You have good leadership in place, people who are actually managing the studios, people who are really looking at the numbers and fan reaction and saying we're going to greenlight what could end up being really great products. And we could see EA become, I don't want to say a giant again because they still are really big in the industry, but actually be consistently making a profit again and not being $20 billion in debt. Or we could see them completely killing off this company. We could see AI pumping out slop, them over monetizing their games to hell and back, and EA is already a bottom of the barrel company. They already have basically irreversibly damaged themselves with all of the terrible decisions they've made over the years. But at the same time, I still think that it could get slightly worse. It says we're 2 days out from EA's announcement that it would sell to Saudi Arabian private equity for $55 billion, and as the dust settles, concerns continue to mount. Concerns from people within the industry because most gamers do not care. Most gamers are saying, we'll see what happens when this deal finally goes through in 2027. We'll see if the Biowares get the chop. We'll see if activists actually get fired fired or laid off. Like, it's going to be years before we see any significant change. Some inside the company are worried about possible cuts, layoffs, and censorship down the road, and the logistics of the deal don't necessarily do much to reassure them. Now, I'm somebody who, of course, is anti-censorship, and I have talked about censorship in the video game industry for years at this point, but these people don't give a fuck about censorship unless it could affect them. And it's like I always say, all censorship is bad censorship. Look at the Jimmy Kimmel situation. There were people on the left screaming about Trump censoring Jimmy Kimmel, even though we found out that that wasn't the case. But let's just say, for argument's sake, they were correct. Where was that same energy when Biden was having people's YouTube accounts shut down and their social media accounts locked down and forcing all of these television hosts to push the propaganda he and his administration wanted about something like COVID-19? They didn't keep that same energy when it was conservatives being censored, but when they end up being censored, well, that's just too far. You either have to fight back against all censorship, or you yourself are one day going to be the target of censorship and nobody's going to come to defend you. And well, we know now that, of course, it wasn't, Trump forcing their hands. It was just his ratings being so terrible that they said, you know what, after these comments, these are the straws that broke the camel's back. And he is back now, but his ratings have already plummeted yet again. Though it says earlier this week, Bloomberg reported that S&P Global Rating plans to lower EA's credit rating to junk status once the leveraged buyout deal is completed sometime next year. We were hearing reports about 2027, so I'm not sure if Kotaku's wrong or that initial information was wrong, but it says, though, it's currently BBB+, but would fall into the non-investment grade or speculative territory once saddled with the $20 billion loan required to pay off all of the Battlefield 6 publishers' existing shareholders at a 25% premium. Now, of course, they are talking about Bioware and how some analysts who spoke to Kotaku have suggested that going private could free EA from the whims of a stock market based around quarterly earnings reports, but it could also be that being saddled with a ton of debt completely reshapes the decades-old gaming company as we know it. I don't really care. After the Dragon Age, the Veilguards, and the Anthems, and the Mass Effect Andromedas, I don't see a way that Bioware could come back from the hole they've dug themselves into. And again, they're a shell of the company they once were, so I'm not going to shed a tear if they disappear tomorrow. It also talks about how Respawn Entertainment recently faced multiple rounds of layoffs and saw multiple projects canceled, including a prototype for a long-awaited return to the world of Titanfall, even though we already technically saw that because Apex Legends was also a return to the Titanfall universe. Though, one major problem they have, of course, is activists being fired. For the studios that have more of a track record, especially a track record that maybe doesn't line up with your own political views, you're going to look at that studio and wonder how you make them fit into your new structure, Mark Dara said in a video. It's hard to imagine that you have Bioware pivot from having very progressive messaging to having the reverse because it's what the government wants. Has he ever thought about that maybe that's what customers want? I'm not saying completely get rid of LGBTQ plus themes and relationships. I'm not saying erase all diverse people from games, but maybe if you tone that rhetoric back a little bit by like 10 or 15%, you would be making so much money for this company that your studio would not be on the chopping block. You would not feel like, oh my gosh, we're going to lose our jobs tomorrow, because you would be so essential to their future business plans. I don't know why he doesn't think about it that way. Probably because he's so entrenched in the ideology that he's pushing. He just figures everybody wants that, even though we can tell that's definitely not the case. So of course, we have the access media melting down and really fear-mongering surrounding this situation, saying, oh, the gay stuff is out and people's rights are going to be taken away from them and developers are going to lose their jobs, when really they shouldn't probably have those jobs in the first place. If they suck at their jobs, they're not creating content that is leading to funds made for the company. And maybe a return to masculinity is exactly what gamers want. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this important and informative, make sure to give it a like, and if you didn't, give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I'll talk to you all again in the next video really soon.